There is a low iron gate at the side of the school where the little ones come in, painted the dull green of every fence in the district so that no one would look at it twice. And for 11 years it was my job to open it at 10 to 9 and close it at 9 sharp. And in all that time, I never once thought of it as a place where anything could happen. I am the caretaker. My name is Wend Alderbrook, and I have swept that yard and salted those steps and unblocked those gutters since before the youngest of the royal children was born. And if you had told me on the morning this happened that I would spend the rest of my life telling people about a green side gate, I would have laughed at you and gone back to my broom. But I am getting ahead of the thing. Let me stand you where I stood, because that is the only honest way to tell it. It was an ordinary Tuesday in the wet part of autumn, the sky the color of a wrung dishcloth, the plane trees along the lane dropping their big yellow hands onto the pavement faster than I could rake them. The school sits behind a wall on a quiet street, and it is not a grand place, whatever people imagine. It teaches the children of shopkeepers and clerks and a magistrate or two, and it teaches, 3 mornings a week, a small serious boy called Bram who happens to be a prince, and his older cousin Torin who is 11 and thinks he is 30, and it teaches them the same as everyone else, which is the whole point of the place and the reason his family chose it. No trumpets, no red carpet. A green gate and a caretaker with a bad knee. I had the gate open and I was standing just inside it with my rake, watching the lane, because that was the new arrangement and I will come to why. The cars came the way they always came, the ordinary cars, the mothers double parking and calling out and the fathers checking their watches, and among them, unremarkable, a dark motor car that pulled up across the street and did not move. I noticed it the way you notice a fly in a room before you can see it, a wrongness at the edge, a car parked where cars did not park, its engine ticking, its windows too clean. I did not know then what it was. I know now. And I noticed the same instant the man standing at my gate. He was one of ours, and by ours I mean he belonged to the family, though he was not the sort of soldier the postcards sell. There were no bearskins here, no scarlet, no ceremony. He wore a plain dark coat over a plain dark suit, and if you passed him on the street you would take him for a solicitor's clerk or a man come to read the meter, and that was the design of him, I think, to be nothing, to be furniture, until he was needed. His name was Sergeant Havard Cray. He had been assigned to the school run 6 weeks before, after the last little trouble, and in those 6 weeks I had exchanged perhaps 40 words with him, most of them about the weather and the state of the drains. He stood the way water stands. That is the closest I can come to it. Not stiff, not braced still, in a way that made everything around him look as though it were fidgeting. His eyes moved and nothing else did. They moved over the lane, over the cars, over the mothers, over the dark motor car across the street, and then back, and then over it all again, on a slow circuit you would never notice unless you watched him for a full minute, which I had taken to doing because I found it restful. "Morning, Sergeant," I said because I always did. "Morning, Mr. Alderbrook." He did not look at me when he said it. He was looking at the car. I followed his eyes. "Someone waiting on a child, most like," I said. "Most like," he agreed, in a voice that meant no. Now I have to explain about the last little trouble, or none of the rest of it will land the way it should. 2 months before, on a bright dry morning with no warning at all, a man with a long lens had climbed the low wall of the churchyard opposite and stood among the gravestones taking photographs over the school wall, of the yard, of the children at their break, and it had gone on for the better part of an hour before anyone thought it strange enough to telephone. There was no crime in it, I was told, or none that anyone could easily name. He was on public ground. He pointed his lens where he liked, and the pictures when they surfaced were only pictures: a boy on a swing, a boy with a scraped knee, a boy who happened to be 6th in line to a throne eating a jam sandwich. Harmless, the papers said when the family complained, newsworthy, in the public interest. But the headmistress had not liked the churchyard man, and the family had liked him less, and out of that quiet displeasure had come Sergeant Cray, 6 weeks of him, standing at the green gate 3 mornings a week doing nothing whatsoever with a completeness that I came, in time, to understand was the opposite of nothing. He was there so that the churchyard man, or any man like him, would find a wall he had not counted on. He never touched anyone. He never raised his voice. He never, in 6 weeks, so much as stepped off the school's own step onto the public pavement, and I asked him about that once, why he kept so carefully to our side of the line, and he said a thing I have turned over a great many times since. "The line is the only weapon I'm sure of," he said, "so I don't waste it." I didn't understand him then. I understand him now. That Tuesday the churchyard was empty. I had checked it myself out of habit, and there was no one among the stones, no lens over the wall, and I had let myself think foolishly that the trouble was done, and the sergeant was a formality we would keep out of politeness for a month or 2 more and then let go. The dark motor car across the street was not in the churchyard. It was just a car. I told myself that 4 or 5 times in the space of a minute, which is a sure sign a man does not believe himself. The bell had not yet rung. The lane was at its fullest, 20 or 30 cars and twice that many people, umbrellas going up against a spit of rain, satchels swinging, the ordinary loud tender chaos of a school morning. And into that chaos, unremarked, the door of the dark motor car opened, and a man got out and shut it softly behind him, and I want you to understand that he did nothing wrong in that moment, nothing at all. A man may get out of his car on a public street, and yet the hair on my arm stood up as if a cold hand had drawn across them, and I looked at Sergeant Cray, and Sergeant Cray had already seen. He had a bag, that was the first thing. A soft black bag on a strap across his body, the kind a tradesman carries, and his hand rested on it in the way a man's hand rests on a thing he means to open quickly. He was younger than the churchyard man had been, and better dressed, in a jacket that fit him, and he had the easy, loose walk of someone who has done a thing many times and thinks himself good at it. He crossed the street not toward the main entrance, where the parents were, but at an angle toward the corner, toward the mouth of the lane, toward the green side gate where the little ones came in. Toward us. I did not move because I did not know I was allowed to, and because there was nothing yet to move against. But Sergeant Cray shifted his weight. That was all he did. He shifted his weight from his back foot to the balls of both, an ounce of readiness, and if you had blinked you would have missed it, and I have never in my life seen a smaller motion carry so much weather in it. "Mr. Alderbrook," he said, very low, not turning his head, "in a moment I'm going to ask you to bring the children in, not yet, when I say." "What is it?" I said, my mouth had gone dry. "Who is he?" "Someone who does this for a living," the sergeant said, and then in the same flat quiet, as if he were remarking that the drains wanted seeing to, "He's fast. Watch." The prince had not yet arrived. That is the thing I keep coming back to, the mercy of the timing and the cruelty of it both. That in the moment the man got out of the car, the boy the man had come for was still 2 streets away in the back of an ordinary hatchback with his cousin, arguing, I later learned, about whether a beetle counts as an insect. And I have thought many times how strange it is that a child can be the center of a storm and know nothing of it, be its whole cause and its whole target, and be, in that instant, entirely occupied with a beetle. The man with the bag reached the corner. He stopped there and he looked up the lane at the school gate, and he looked at the little dull green side gate, and he looked at the caretaker with the rake and the plain man in the dark coat standing beside him, and I watched him decide that we were nothing. I watched it cross his face, the small dismissal, the professional's glance that files 2 men into the box marked no obstacle, and he was wrong, and he did not know it, and he took out his camera. It was a large thing, black and heavy, with a lens on it as long as my forearm, and he checked it without hurry, thumbing a dial, raising it half toward his eye and lowering it again, the way a marksman settles his rifle before the game breaks cover. And Sergeant Cray watched him do it with an attention so total it was almost tender, as if the man were a lesson he was determined to learn by heart, and he said, so softly I felt it more than heard it, "There he is." Down the lane, at the top of it, an ordinary gray hatchback had turned the corner and was crawling toward us through the crowd of cars. I know now because it all came out afterward in the inquiry, in the hearing, in the long gray pages I was made to read and sign, what that man was and what he had come to do. But I did not know it then. I only knew what I saw, and what I saw was a man raise a camera the size of a small dog and point it up a lane full of small children as if it were a thing he had every right to do, and a plain man in a dark coat go very, very still. His name, the man with the camera, was Marin Vosk, though I will call him the photographer because that is the word the newspapers settled on and it is cleaner than the ones I first used. He was not a criminal in the beginning. I want to be fair because the sergeant was fair, and if a caretaker can learn anything from a soldier, it may as well be that. Vosk sold pictures. He had sold pictures for 11 years, to papers and to men who sold to papers, and he had learned that the pictures that sold best were the ones no one was supposed to have. A face behind a hospital window, a widow at a graveside, a small serious boy who happened to be a prince eating his breakfast on a school step. There was a great deal of money in a picture like that, and there was more money still in a picture of the boy frightened, or crying, or running, because a frightened prince is worth 10 calm ones, and Marin Vosk knew that better than he knew his own children's names, and he had come to the Green Gate that Tuesday morning to make a frightened prince. He did not think of it that way. No man thinks of himself as the villain of the tale. He thought of it as work. He thought of it as a lens and a boy and a window of perhaps 4 seconds between the car door opening and the child reaching the safety of the school, 4 seconds in which a good man with a fast thumb might make a year's wages, and he had planned it, I learned, for a week. He had watched the lane. He had timed the hatchback. He knew the boy came in by the Green Gate because it was quieter, and he had reasoned correctly, damn him. That quieter meant fewer eyes, and fewer eyes meant a clean shot. What he had not reckoned on, what did not fit into his calculation of angles and light and seconds, was the plain man in the dark coat who did not move. The hatchback drew nearer. I could see, now, 2 small heads in the back of it, one dark and one darker, bobbing, still arguing about their beetle. The photographer saw them too. His whole body changed. I have seen a heron do the same thing over a stream, that sudden gathering of a loose creature into a single line of purpose, and it turned my stomach to see it done by a man over a car full of children. "Now, Mr. Alderbrook," said Sergeant Cray. I did not ask what he meant. My legs knew before my head did. I turned and I went up the yard toward the 2 or 3 little ones who had already come in and were dawdling by the boot scraper, and I gathered them the way you gather chickens, arms wide, herding. In you go, quick now, in you go, biscuits inside. And they went, laughing, thinking it a game, and behind me I heard the hatchback stop. I heard the car door. And I heard, over all the ordinary morning noise, the small mechanical stutter of a camera beginning to fire. I turned, I could not help it, no man could. The boy was out of the car. Bram the prince, 6 years old, a satchel too big for him bumping at his hip, his hair sticking up at the back the way it always did because no comb in the kingdom could persuade it down. Bram was 3 steps onto the pavement with his cousin Torin a pace behind him, and between the 2 boys and the Green Gate, close, too close, was the photographer down on one knee to be at the child's height, the great black lens a hand's breadth from the boy's face, firing, 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 and he was saying something. I could hear it now. He was saying the thing that these men say, the thing designed to make a small face turn and open and show its fear. "Bram, Bram, over here. Where's your mother, Bram? Is it true she's ill? Bram, Bram, look at me. Is your mother dying, Bram?" And the boy's face began to do exactly what the man had paid a week of his life to make it do. It began to crumple. He did not understand the words, not fully, but he understood the tone and the crowding and the huge black eye of the lens a foot from his own eyes, and he understood that a stranger was very close and very loud and knew his name, and his mouth opened and his chin went. And Torin, 11 and brave and helpless, stepped in front of his little cousin with both arms out and shouted, "Leave him alone," in a voice that cracked in the middle, and the photographer simply leaned around him for the better shot, because a big boy defending a little one is a good picture too, and that was the moment the line was crossed. I will tell you exactly what the sergeant did, because there has been a great deal of nonsense talked about it since, and I was there, and most of them were not. He did not run. That is the first thing, and it is the thing no one believes. A man's instinct, seeing a child crowded, is to charge, to shout, to make himself large. Sergeant Cray did none of that. He crossed the pavement in 4 unhurried steps that ate the distance faster than a run would have, because a run has to slow down at the end, and he never had to, and he arrived beside the kneeling photographer neither fast nor slow, but simply, suddenly, there, the way the tide is suddenly at your feet. And he put himself between the lens and the boy. That was the whole of it, the first move. He did not touch the man. He put his own body, a plain dark coat, a shoulder, a back, into the 4 inches of space between the great black lens and the prince's crumpling face, and the lens was looking all at once at the buttons of a dark coat and nothing else, and the firing stopped, because there was nothing to fire at. "That's far enough," said Sergeant Cray. He did not say it loudly. I was 10 feet away and I heard every word, and so did the man on his knee, and the man on his knee did the thing that men like him always do, the thing they have done 100 times and gotten away with 100 times. He came up off his knee angry right into the sergeant's space, chest first, lens swinging, and he said, "You can't touch me. I'm on a public street. You can't touch me. You jumped up doorman. I know my rights. Get out of my shot." "I haven't touched you," said the sergeant. And he hadn't. That was the terrible calm mathematics of the man. He had not laid a finger on Marin Vosk, and he did not intend to, and everything that happened next happened inside that fact like a nut inside its shell. "Torin," said the sergeant without turning round, "take your cousin's hand, walk him to Mr. Alderbrook, don't run, there's no need to run." And here is a thing I have never forgotten. Torin, 11 years old, shaking with the leftover fright of it, did exactly as he was told. He took Bram's hand. He did not run. He walked his little cousin up the path at a steady pace, past me and through the green gate, and it was the sergeant's not running that did it, the whole grammar of the man's calm passing into the boy, so that a child who a moment before had been shouting with a cracked voice now walked like a soldier. And I have thought since that the sergeant taught Torin more in those 4 seconds than the school taught him all term. The gate clicked shut. I stood with my back against it and a small prince's hand in mine, and I felt the boy shaking, and I looked down at him, and his face was that terrible in-between of a child deciding whether to cry, and I did the only thing I could think of, which was to say, "Now then, did you settle it about the beetle?" And Bram looked up at me, and something in him grabbed at the ordinary question like a drowning man at a rope, and he said, in a very small voice, "Torin says it's an insect, but it's got a shell, so I don't think it's a proper one." And I said that was a very good point, and we would ask the teacher, and I got them both inside, and that is where my part in the front of it ends and the sergeant's part goes on without me. But I have the rest of it. I have it from the men who saw, and from the tape, and from the hearing, and I have gone over it so many times that I can tell it to you now as if I had stayed on the pavement and watched, which, God help me, a part of me wishes I had. The photographer, robbed of his shot, did what such men do. He tried to go around. He feinted left toward the gate and cut right quick, the loose, easy quickness I had seen in him at the corner, meaning to slip past the sergeant's shoulder and get his lens onto the boys' backs as they went in. One more frame, a prince fleeing, worth more than all the rest. And Sergeant Cray moved with him. Not against him, with him, mirroring. the way a good dancer follows a bad one, so that wherever Vosk's lens tried to point, there was a dark coat already filling it, patient, unhurried, always exactly one body's width between the camera and the children. And the man could not get past because the man was trying to be fast, and the sergeant did not need to be fast. He only needed to be there, and he was always already there. "You're assaulting me," the photographer said, breathing hard now. "You're blocking me. That's assault. I'll have your job. I'll have your name in every paper in the country by tonight, you understand me? Move." "I'm standing on a public pavement," said the sergeant. "The same as you. I'm not touching you. You're free to leave whenever you like." "I don't want to leave. I've a right to be here." "You do," the sergeant agreed, "and so do I." It was maddening, I am told, to watch. The photographer was a man accustomed to one of two outcomes. Either his target fled and he got the picture of them fleeing, or someone put hands on him and he got the far better picture and the far better lawsuit of being manhandled by a heavy in a uniform. Sergeant Cray gave him neither. He would not be provoked into a touch, and he would not step aside, and he would not raise his voice. And the photographer, who had prepared for a wall he could climb or a wall he could sue, found himself up against a wall made of nothing he could hold. A man simply, lawfully in the way. But I have run ahead of myself again, and left out the thing that turned a nuisance into a crime, and it is important, so let me go back the length of a breath. When the photographer fainted and cut, when he made his quick move to get around the sergeant and onto the children's backs, he did one thing more than dart. He put out his free hand, the one not holding the camera, and he shoved, not at the sergeant, at the gate. He drove his shoulder and his flat hand at the green side gate a half-second after Torin had walked Bram through it. Hard, meaning to bang it open again and follow the boys into the yard, into the school's own ground, where the light was better and the children could not run, and his hand hit the iron, and the gate did not give, because I had my back against it, and because I found this out later when they showed me the drawings. The law of the place ran along that iron like a live wire. A public pavement is one thing. A man may stand on it and point his lens where he likes, and the law will shrug. But the moment Marin Vosk's hand drove that gate to force his way onto private ground, in pursuit of a child, having already crowded that child and frightened that child and shouted cruelties at that child to make him weep for the camera, the moment his hand hit that iron, he stopped being a nuisance and became a man committing an offense, several offenses, with his own hand, in front of a dozen witnesses and one very calm sergeant who had been waiting, I now believe, for exactly this. Not hoping for it, waiting for it the way a good goalkeeper waits, so that when the ball finally comes he is already where it is going. "You just laid hands on that gate to force entry to a school," said Sergeant Cray. His voice did not change, it never changed. "In pursuit of a child. I'm detaining you now, and I want you to understand that I'm allowed to, and I want you to understand exactly why, so there's no confusion later." And the photographer laughed at him. That was his mistake, the last and biggest of the morning, though he did not know it. He laughed and he lifted the camera and he took one deliberate shot of the sergeant's face at point-blank range, the flash going off in the gray morning like a slap, and he said, "Detain me? You're a doorman with a nice coat. Get out of my way or I swear." He did not finish the oath. What Sergeant Cray did then was so quick and so quiet that half the parents in the lane did not know it had happened until it was over. He did not strike. He did not wrestle. He stepped inside the swing of the camera, which was coming up again for another shot, and he took the photographer's wrist, the camera wrist, in one gloved hand, not squeezing, not twisting, simply closing his fingers around it the way you close your hand around the handle of a door. And with the smallest turn of his own body, he brought that wrist down and around and behind the man, and the photographer went with it because his own arm gave him no other choice. And in the space of a single second Marin Vosk was facing the school wall with one arm folded gently up behind his back, and the sergeant's steady voice at his ear. "Stop pulling," the sergeant said. You'll hurt yourself, and I don't want that. Nobody wants that. Stand still and listen." The photographer, to his credit or his stupidity, stopped pulling. "You are being detained by a member of the household under the powers of a citizen and an officer of the family both," said the sergeant, still low, still level, as if he were reading a train timetable. "You forced a gate onto school grounds in pursuit of a minor. You crowded and distressed that minor to obtain a photograph. Both of those are offenses, and I have witnessed them, and so have a great many other people, and there is a camera on the corner of this lane that has witnessed them too. You are not hurt. You will not be hurt as long as you stand still. The police have been called, and they are close, because I called them 9 minutes ago when your car did not move. And now we are going to wait for them, you and I, right here, without any more shouting." I want you to notice a thing in that speech, because I did not notice it at the time, and it took the hearing to teach it to me. He had called the police 9 minutes before. 9 minutes. Before the boy arrived, before the man got out of the car, before a single line was crossed, the sergeant had looked at a dark motorcar parked where cars did not park and made a telephone call, quietly, one hand in his coat, never taking his eyes off the lane, so that when the moment came there would be no scramble, no delay, no 10 minutes of a frightened child in the cold waiting for help. The help was already rolling, was already 2 streets off. Because a man whose whole trade is stillness had seen the storm, while it was still just a cloud on the edge of the sky. The photographer had time to say one more thing. He turned his head against the wall, and he found me with his eye. I had come back out through the gate by then, unable to stay inside, and he found the 2 or 3 other parents who had stopped, and he said loudly, performing now, "Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? He's got my arm up my back. That's assault. That's a lawsuit. Get it on your phones, all of you, get his face." And here is the thing that broke him, though it took weeks for the full weight of it to land. Not one phone came up. Or rather, a dozen phones had come up, but not one of them was pointed the way he wanted. The parents in that lane had watched a stranger kneel in front of a 6-year-old and shout at him about his dying mother. And they had watched a plain man in a dark coat put himself between the child and the lens without laying a finger on anyone. And they had made up their minds about which of the 2 was the villain long before the arm went up the back. And when they lifted their phones, it was to film the photographer, red-faced against the wall, shouting for sympathy he had spent in the first 4 seconds and would never get back. The pictures that went round the country by nightfall were not the ones Marin Vosk had come to take. They were pictures of Marin Vosk. I have thought a great deal about that. About how the man who had built his whole life on catching other people at their worst moment was, in the end, undone by being caught at his own. The police came within the 2 minutes the sergeant had promised, a plain car, no sirens, 2 officers who plainly knew Cray and greeted him by name, and a short, low conversation I could not hear. And then the photographer was walked to the car with his own hands cuffed in front of him, still talking, always talking, and the door shut on the talking, and the lane went quiet, and I realized my knees were shaking and had been shaking for some time. Sergeant Cray watched the car pull away. Then he turned and he picked up something off the pavement. The photographer's camera had fallen when the wrist came down, and it lay there in a puddle, its great lens fogging in the wet, and he did not smash it, and he did not pocket it, and he did not open it up to see what was on it, though every man in that lane wanted him to. He picked it up carefully by its strap, the way you pick up a thing that is evidence and not yours, and he handed it to the older of the 2 officers before the car door had even closed, and he said, "Everything on that stays sealed. There's an image of a minor on it that shouldn't exist. See, it's handled properly." Then he came back to the gate to me, and for the first time all morning he looked, not at the lane but at the school, at the door the children had gone through, and something in his face loosened by a fraction of an inch, and he said, "The boy. Is he all right?" "Shaken," I said. "Torin got him inside. He's asking about a beetle." And Sergeant Cray, who had not smiled once in 6 weeks of mourning, smiled, just for a second. "Good," he said. "That's good. Children who ask about beetles are all right. You would think that would be the end of it. A man had crossed a line, and a good man had stopped him lawfully, and the police had taken him away, and a small prince was inside asking his teacher about the shell of a beetle, and the sun would come out and the story would fold up neat and warm like a blanket. That is how these things go in the telling afterward. It is not how they go in the living. In the living, the trouble was only starting. By noon the pictures were everywhere, the parents' pictures, the phone pictures, Marin Vosk read and shouting against the school wall, and by the same noon a different story had begun to grow up alongside them, a weed beside the flower, and the weed had money and lawyers and the patience of money and lawyers. Because Marin Vosk did not work alone. He sold to a man, and that man sold to an agency, and that agency was owned at the top of a long ladder of owners, by people who had a very great interest indeed in the principle that a man with a camera may stand where he likes and point it where he likes, and that no plain man in a dark coat may lay a gloved hand upon his wrist, ever, for any reason, whatever a 6-year-old's face may be doing at the time. They did not care about Marin Vosk. I want to be clear about that, because it took me a long while to understand it. They would have thrown Vosk into the sea without a backward look. What they cared about was the wrist. What they cared about was that a member of the household had detained a photographer, and if that were allowed to stand, if the court said yes, a guard may take a paparazzo's arm when he forces a school gate, then the whole trade would tighten by an inch, and an inch of that trade was worth more money than I will see in 100 lifetimes. So they did what money does. They picked up Marin Vosk out of the gutter, and they dusted him off, and they made him, overnight, a martyr. The story turned. It happens faster than you would believe. By the evening editions, Vosk was no longer a man who had frightened a child. He was a working press photographer, a father of 2, assaulted at his lawful labor by a state heavy, his wrist wrenched, his camera seized, his livelihood, that word, always that word, his livelihood destroyed by an overreaching palace that thought itself above the law. There was a photograph of his wrist with a bandage on it. I saw that photograph a great many times over the following weeks, that bandaged wrist, and I will tell you now that the doctors who examined him found no injury of any kind, not a bruise, not a strain, and that the bandage was a thing his lawyers had wrapped on him for the cameras, and that it did more work for their cause than any true wound ever could have. A bandage on a wrist is a story all by itself. It does not need to be true. And the sergeant, oh, they came for the sergeant. His name was in the papers by the second day. Not the papers had it exactly, but the agency had it, and the agency put it about, so that within a week every hostile column in the country knew that the man who had manhandled Marin Vosk was a Sergeant Havard Cray, and they went digging into him the way they dig, and I watched them do it, and I want to tell you what they found, because it matters to everything that came after. They found nothing. That was the first thing, and it enraged them. There was no scandal in the man, no debt, no drink, no woman, no temper. He had served 14 years, first in a regiment I am not permitted to name and then in the close protection of the family, and his record was so clean it was almost insulting. So they did the thing they do when they cannot find dirt. They invented an angle. They said his very cleanness was suspicious. They said a man that controlled must be hiding something. They ran a photograph of his still, unmoving face, Vosk's own last photograph, the point-blank one, the slap of a flash in the gray morning, and under it they printed captions about cold-eyed enforcers and jack-booted household thugs, and they made his stillness, the very stillness I had come to find so restful at the Green Gate, into a thing that looked, in newsprint, like menace. I was angry about it. I said so to anyone who would listen, which by then was rather a lot of people, because the caretaker who had been there was suddenly a man worth talking to. But when I said it to the sergeant himself, when I found him at the gate one gray morning in the middle of it all, and I told him it was a disgrace, what they were printing, that he ought to sue them, that he ought to fight, he heard me out. And then he said the second thing of his that I have never forgotten. "Let them print it," he said. "A picture of me standing still can't hurt the boy. That's the only thing I'm here to weigh." He looked down the lane out of habit, the old slow circuit of his eyes. "They can have my name. They can have my face. As long as they're busy with me, they're not at that gate." I understood him then a little. I understand him fully now. He had made himself the target on purpose. He had picked up that camera and handed it away sealed, and he had let his own name go out into the storm, because a storm needs somewhere to go, and better it go to a grown man in a dark coat who could stand it than to a 6-year-old who could not. He was doing at the level of the whole country exactly what he had done on the pavement, putting his body between the lens and the child. He just did it now, with his reputation instead of his shoulder. But a man cannot stand in front of a whole storm forever, not alone, and the storm was very large, and it had lawyers, and it had decided that the way to win was not to defend Marin Vosk but to destroy Havard Cray, and to that end, in the third week, they did a thing that changed the whole shape of the fight. They filed a charge against him. Not a lawsuit they had threatened from the first hour, and everyone expected it. This was worse and cleverer. They found a magistrate, or the machinery of the thing found one, and they laid a criminal complaint of assault against Sergeant Havard Cray on Marin Vosk's sworn account, and because a criminal complaint against a household officer over a member of the family is a serious and delicate thing, it could not simply be waved away, and it moved, slowly, terribly, toward a hearing. And the beauty of it from their side was this: it did not matter whether they won. If Havard Cray were charged, then every guard at every school gate in the kingdom would know that a gloved hand on a wrist, however lawful, however gentle, however necessary, could end in the dock. And a guard who is afraid to touch a wrist is a wall with a door in it. That was the whole of their plan, not to punish one man, to open every gate. The family understood this faster than I did. I should have expected that. You do not sit sixth in line to a throne, even at 6 years old, without a great many clever grown people thinking about the shape of the world you will inherit, and they thought about it now. I met the child's father in the 4th week. I had never met him before. The whole point of the school, remember, was that no one important came to it in a way that anyone would notice. But he came, one evening after the children were gone, in an ordinary car with 2 plain men in it, and he came to the green gate, and he asked to see where it had happened, and I showed him. Crown Prince Rowan. He was younger than I expected and graver, and he stood a long time at the gate looking at the iron and the puddle and the pavement, and he asked me to tell him exactly what I had seen, from the beginning, leaving nothing out, and I told him. And when I got to the part where the photographer knelt down to be at his son's height and asked the boy whether his mother was dying, the Crown Prince's face did a thing I have not forgotten and will not describe, out of respect. Except to say that a father is a father, whatever crown is coming to him. And the mother, I said, because I had wondered, because the whole cruelty of the thing had hung on it. Is she, I mean, the man kept saying, is the princess. My wife is tired, the Crown Prince said. She has been unwell and she is getting better, and it is the sort of private, ordinary tiredness that any family has and no one else is owed a word of. That is exactly why that man came, not because there was a story, because there wasn't one, and a picture of my son crying would have made one, and a made-up story about a dying mother sells better than a true one about a tired one. He turned from the gate. They will not have it, not the picture, and not the principle behind it. Do you understand me, Mr. Alderbrook? This is not going to be about my son. My son is safe, thanks to your sergeant, and my son will stay out of it entirely. He is 6, and he will not be a headline, not even a sympathetic one. This is going to be about whether a man may kneel in front of any child in this country and shout at him until he weeps, so long as he has a press card in his pocket. And on that, we are going to fight, and we are going to win, and your sergeant is not going to fight it alone. I believed him. There is a way great people have of saying a thing that makes it sound already done. But belief is a cheap thing at a gate in the evening, and the hearing was still weeks away, and the papers were still full of the bandaged wrist, and the sergeant still stood his post 3 mornings a week with his name being dragged through the mud of the whole kingdom, and I will not pretend those were easy weeks, because they were not. They were, in fact, about to get harder. Because the agency, having filed its charge, now played the card it had been holding back, the card it thought would end the matter, and it was a good card, and for a few days I thought it might. They produced a witness. A woman, respectable-looking, a nanny by trade, who swore she had been in the lane that Tuesday morning collecting a child of her own charge, and who swore on paper, with a lawyer's stamp on it, that she had seen the whole thing, and that it had not happened as the parents' phones showed. She swore that the sergeant had struck first, that he had come across the pavement and seized the photographer without warning, that the photographer had merely been taking photographs of the street, that the child had not been distressed until the guard's own violence frightened him, that the whole account of a kneeling man shouting cruelties was a fabrication got up afterward by a palace protecting its own. She was clear. She was calm. She had a name and a face and an employer, and she signed her name to every word. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I had been there and she had not. I would have seen her. In a lane I had watched every morning for 11 years. I knew every nanny and every mother and every double-parked car, and she was none of them. But knowing a thing and proving it are 2 different countries, and for 3 or 4 days that false witness sat across the story like a fallen tree, and the papers that had been printing the bandaged wrist now printed her calm, respectable face beside it, and the tide of the thing, which had begun to turn in the sergeant's favor, turned back. I went to him the morning after her statement ran. I found him at the gate as always, still, watching the old slow circuit of his eyes, as if nothing in the whole storm had touched him and I could not bear it, and I said, "There's a woman swearing you struck him first. Swearing it. And they believe her, half of them believe her, and it's all lies, and you just stand there." "I know," he said. "You know she's lying." "I know she wasn't there." He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. There was no one of her description in this lane that morning. I watched every face that came into it, Mr. Alderbrook. That's the job. She wasn't one of them. "Then say so, tell them." "I have told them," he said, "once, under oath to the people it's owed to. Saying it twice to a newspaper changes nothing except that I've spoken twice. I'm a witness in this, not a party to it. My job now is to stand still and let the truth be found by the people whose job that is. If I start shouting my innocence up and down this lane, I look like a man who needs to, and a man who needs to looks guilty. So I'll stand still." He glanced at me, and there was something almost kind in it. "Stillness isn't nothing. I know it looks like nothing. It's the hardest thing I do." And then he told me a thing I did not expect, quietly, the way he said everything. And it was the thing that made me realize the storm was not going to be won by lawyers or by patience, but by something small and stubborn that had been sitting quietly under the whole affair since the first morning, waiting, the way he waited, to be needed. "There was a camera on the corner," he said. "You remember. I told Vosk there was, and he laughed. It's a traffic camera. It watches the junction, the parked cars, the whole mouth of the lane. It's been watching that spot for 6 years. It watched everything that Tuesday morning, from before the dark car parked to after the police car left. He looked down the lane at it, a small gray box on a pole that I had walked under 10,000 times and never once seen. The agency doesn't know it's there. Or they know and they think it wasn't running, or they think it points the wrong way, or they're gambling that the footage is gone. Most of it does get wiped after 7 days, and they've spun this out past 7 days on purpose, so that by the time anyone thinks to ask, there'll be nothing left to ask for." He paused. "That's what the delay is for, Mr. Alderbrook. Every one of these weeks. They're not building a case. They're waiting for a tape to die." I went cold. Then it's too late. "It's been weeks." "It would be too late," the sergeant said, "if someone hadn't asked for it on the first morning. I asked for it before the police car had gone. It's held, sealed, dated, preserved out of the machine and locked away from the 9th minute after I first saw that car. The smallest thing crossed his face, not a smile, the ghost of one. They think they're waiting out a tape. The tape's been waiting for them for a month. I have told you that the family said the boy would stay out of it, and they kept their word, and I want to honor that, so I will not pretend the 6-year-old prince took any part in what came next. He did not. He went to school 3 mornings a week and learned his letters and settled in the end the great question of the beetle. It is an insect. The teacher ruled, shell or no shell, and Bram accepted the ruling with the gravity of a small judge, and he knew nothing of hearings or tapes or bandaged wrists, and that ignorance was itself a kind of victory, the thing the whole fight was to protect. A child who does not know he was a target is a child the target makers did not get. But his cousin knew. Torin was 11, and 11 is old enough to read a newspaper and old enough to be angry, and Torin had been there, in front of his cousin with both arms out, shouting "Leave him alone" in a voice that cracked. And when the false witness's calm, respectable face appeared in the papers swearing that the guard had struck first, that the child had not been frightened until the guard frightened him, it was Torin who could not bear it, and it was Torin in the end who did a small, brave thing that mattered more than anyone expected. He wrote it down, all of it in his own careful 11-year-old hand, on paper from his school exercise book. What the man had said to Bram, the exact words, the kneeling, the great black lens a foot from his little cousin's face, the shove at the gate, the sergeant stepping in without touching anyone, the way the sergeant had told him not to run and he hadn't. He wrote it the same evening it happened, before anyone told him to, because it had frightened him, and writing frightening things down was a thing his mother had taught him to do, and he had put it in a drawer and said nothing, and it was still there, dated in a child's hand the night of the event, weeks before the agency ever thought to invent a witness. And when Torin saw the false woman's statement in the paper, he brought his exercise book page to his uncle the Crown Prince and said, "But that's not true. I wrote what happened. Look, I wrote it that night." The lawyers, I am told, went very quiet when they read it. Not because a child's account would decide a court. It would not, on its own, but because a contemporaneous account, written by a witness the same night, in a hand that could be dated, that matched the parents' phone footage in every particular, and matched the sealed traffic tape in every particular, was a stone the false witness's calm, respectable lie could not roll away. She had sworn the child was not frightened. Here was the child's own cousin, writing the same night, describing a boy who had begun to cry. She had sworn there was no shouting about a dying mother. Here was the exact cruel sentence, written down by an 11-year-old before any lawyer could have coached him, because no lawyer coaches an 11-year-old to invent the phrase, "Is your mother dying at 8 o'clock on the evening of the event?" Truth has a texture that lies cannot fake, and the texture of that exercise book page was the texture of a frightened boy telling exactly what he saw, and everyone who read it knew it. So there were, when the hearing finally came, 3 truths lined up against one lie: the parents' phones, the boy cousin's dated account, and the stone that sank the whole thing, the sealed traffic tape, drawn from the machine on the 9th minute, that no one on the other side had known to fear. The hearing was held in a plain room, and I was there, because I was a witness, and I will tell you what I saw, and then I will tell you the one moment in it that I will carry to my grave. Marin Vosk did not look at me. He sat with his lawyers, 3 of them gray and expensive, and his wrist, I checked, was no longer bandaged, the bandage having done its work in the papers and being of no use in a room where a doctor could be called. He looked smaller than he had at the gate. They always do, these men, out of the lane and under the lights. The loose, easy quickness was gone out of him, and what was left was a middle-aged man who took pictures of frightened children for money, sitting very still, hoping. The sergeant sat alone in the plain dark coat, and he was the stillest thing in the room, and I found that, even there, even then, restful. They ran the agency's case first. The false witness gave her calm, respectable account, and she gave it well, and if I had not been in the lane that morning I might have half believed her myself. The lawyers built their wall, a working photographer, a public street, a state heavy, a seized camera, a wrenched wrist, a livelihood destroyed. They were good. I will not pretend they were not good. For an hour that plain room felt like a place where a lie might win, and I sat with my hands in fists and my old knees aching, and I could not see how the truth was going to get up off the floor. And then the family's counsel stood and asked, very mildly, whether the tribunal would care to see the footage from the traffic camera at the mouth of the lane. I have never in my life seen 3 expensive lawyers become 3 ordinary frightened men so fast. One of them half rose. Another put his hand flat on the table as if to steady it. The eldest, the gray one who had built the wall so well, said, "There is, as far as we are aware, no such footage. Any relevant recording would long since have been overwritten in the ordinary course." And the family's counsel said, still mild, "It was preserved on the morning of the event, at the request of Sergeant Cray, timed and logged, before the police had left the scene. It has been held, sealed and unviewed by any party ever since. We would ask the tribunal to be the first to see it." And she let that sit, unviewed by any party, because it meant the family had not doctored it, had not even watched it, had simply held the truth in a box and brought it into the room whole. There was no answer to make to that. The eldest lawyer sat down slowly and did not get up again. They dimmed the plain room and they played the tape. It was silent. A traffic camera has no ear and gray and a little jerky, and it was the most damning thing I have ever watched, precisely because it had no ear and no side and no interest, because it was only a machine that had been pointed at a mouth of a lane for 6 years and had recorded, without caring, exactly what was there. And what was there was this: a dark motor car pulling up and not moving, a plain man at a gate, still, one hand going into his coat, the telephone call, the 9th minute, time-stamped in the corner for anyone to read. A man getting out of the car with a bag and a long lens, crossing at an angle, going to a corner, checking his camera the way a marksman settles a rifle. A gray hatchback creeping up the lane. 2 small heads. And then, and the room had gone so quiet I could hear the old clock on the wall, the man kneeling. Kneeling, in silent gray, in front of a small figure with a satchel too big for it. The great lens a foot from the small face, and the small figure's whole body flinching back, and a bigger child stepping in front with both arms out, and the kneeling man leaning around the bigger child for the shot. The tape had no sound. It did not need one. Nobody in that room needed to hear the words, "Is your mother dying to know?" Watching a grown man kneel to shove a lens into a flinching child's face, exactly what kind of man he was. The false witness had sworn the child was not frightened. On the gray silent tape, the child's whole body was one long flinch. She had sworn the guard struck first. On the gray silent tape, the guard did not cross the pavement until the man drove his hand at the gate. You could see it. The shove, the flat hand hitting the iron, the exact instant the line was crossed. And only then, after it, did the dark coat move. And even then it did not strike. It stepped between, a body in the 4 inches of space, and the firing that you could see in the flare of the flash simply stopped, because there was nothing left to point at but a man's back. They played it to the end. The wrist taken gently, no bruise, no wrench, the arm folded up with a turn so small it was almost courteous. The camera falling. The sergeant picking it up by the strap, not smashing it, not opening it, handing it to an officer. The police car. The quiet. When the lights came up, the false witness was not looking at anyone. And the eldest lawyer, the gray one, asked, because he had to, because it was the only card he had left, whether the woman in the lane, his witness, could be shown on the footage, could be placed at the scene she had sworn to. The family's counsel had been waiting for exactly that question for weeks. The footage covers the entire mouth of the lane, continuously, from before the car parked to after the police left, she said. Every person who entered or left this lane that morning is on it. We have gone through it frame by frame. Your witness is not there. She was not in the lane. She did not see what she swore she saw because there was nothing she could have seen it from. And she turned to the woman herself, not unkindly, and said, "Madam, you have sworn to a scene you were not present at. I would think very carefully now about what you say next." The woman broke, not loudly. She simply put her hand over her mouth and began to cry, and admitted in front of the tribunal that she had never been in the lane, that she had been paid for her statement, that she had been told it would never come to this, that no one would ever check, that it was only words on paper. And with those words, the whole gray, expensive wall the agency had built came down all at once, silently, the way the tape had shown the firing stop, not with a crash, but with a sudden nothing where a moment before there had been a thing. The charge against Sergeant Havard Cray was dismissed inside the hour. But the family had said, at that green gate on that gray evening, that this was not going to be about the boy, that it was going to be about whether a man may kneel in front of any child in the country and shout at him until he weeps so long as he has a press card in his pocket. And they had meant it. And the dismissal of a charge against one sergeant was not enough for them. And here is where the story stops being about one Tuesday morning and becomes about all the Tuesday mornings that came after. Marin Vosk was charged himself now properly for the offenses the tape had shown him commit in Silent Gray, the forced gait, the pursuit, the distress caused to a child to obtain a photograph. He did not go to prison. It was not that kind of wrong. But he was fined and named, and this was the part that ended him. The court ordered every image on the sealed camera destroyed, unpublished, unsold, so that the one thing he had worked a week to make, the frightened prince, the year's wages in 4 seconds, never existed for anyone at all. He had risked everything for a picture, and the picture was taken from him and burned, and there was a kind of justice in that so exact it might have been designed, though it was only the law, working slowly, arriving in the end where the sergeant had stood at the beginning. The agency behind him fared worse, in the way that matters to an agency, which is money and reputation both. The paid witness was a scandal all her own. A paid false witness in a matter touching the royal family is not a small thing, and the men who had arranged her spent the following year explaining themselves in rooms they did not enjoy being in. The trade tightened by more than the inch they had feared. Because the family did the thing they had promised, they took the whole affair, the tape and the exercise book page and the paid liar and the burned photographs, and they laid it in front of the people who make the rules, and they said, in effect, look at what the law allowed until this Tuesday. Look at how close it came to allowing it still. And out of that came a change, a real one, a plain gray clause in a plain gray statute that most people will never read. That the crowding, pursuit, or distressing of a child to obtain an image is an offense in itself, press card or no press card, public street or no public street, and that a person charged with protecting that child may lawfully place himself between the child and the harm. The line the sergeant had drawn with his own body on a wet Tuesday was written, that year, into the law of the land, so that the next guard at the next green gate would not have to draw it alone. They called it, in the papers that had once printed the bandaged wrist and now printed something very different, a landmark. They did not, most of them, mention the caretaker or the exercise book page or the 9th-minute telephone call. They mentioned the tape and the law and the principle. That is how these things are remembered, as principles, as landmarks, as clauses. But I was there, and I will tell you that a principle is a very grand word for what it really was, which was one man deciding on a wet ordinary morning that a line existed and that he would stand on it, and not 1 inch across it, and not 1 inch back from it, for as long as it took. I saw him honored in the end. Not loudly. The family knew him well enough by then to know that loud honors would have been a punishment to a man like Cray. It was a small thing in a small room, and I was invited, which surprised me, a caretaker among all those grave and glittering people, but the crown prince himself had asked for me by name, and so I went, in my good coat with my bad knee, and I stood at the back. And the king, old Alaric, who I had never in my life expected to see close to, spoke a few plain words about a man who had put himself between a child and the whole weight of the world, and had done it without raising his voice or his hand, lawfully, patiently, at cost to his own name, and had held that line until the line became the law. And he pinned a small thing to the sergeant's plain dark coat, and the sergeant stood still to receive it, the same stillness, and I watched from the back, and my eyes were not dry, and I am not ashamed to say it. Afterward in the corridor, a small serious boy was allowed in for a moment, because it was a family thing after all, and the family had wanted it. Bram was 7 by then. He had grown. He walked up to the plain man in the dark coat. He had never really seen him, remember. On the Tuesday it happened the sergeant had been a back, a shoulder, 4 inches of dark coat between the boy and the lens, a thing you are protected by and do not see the face of, and Bram looked up at him, a long way up, and said, in the grave, careful voice of a boy who has thought about a thing, "Were you the one who stood in front of me?" And Sergeant Cray, who did not kneel for lords or bow for lawyers, went down on one knee on the corridor floor so that his eyes were level with the boy's, the way the photographer had knelt, the exact same posture, and made it mean the exact opposite thing forever. "I was," he said. "Torrin said you told him not to run." "That's right." "Why?" said the boy. "Why couldn't we run?" And the sergeant thought about it. You could see him think, giving a child's question the full weight he gave a king's, and he said, "Because running tells the frightening thing it was right to frighten you. And it wasn't. You had every right to walk into your own school on your own morning, and you did, and you didn't give that man one single thing he came for. You were braver than you know." The boy considered this. Then he said, with the sudden total change of subject that only children can manage, "Do you know if a beetle is an insect?" "It is," said the sergeant gravely, "an insect." "Shell or no shell?" "That's what the teacher said," Bram sighed, as if the whole world had at last agreed on something, and he went off down the corridor to find his cousin, and the sergeant rose and straightened his coat and was still again. He went back to the green gate. That surprised people, that a man now written into the law of the land and pinned with a small honor by the king himself would go back to opening a dull green side gate 3 mornings a week. But it did not surprise me, and it would not surprise you if you had understood him at all by now. He had never been at that gate for the glory of it, there being none, and he did not leave it for the glory either. He stood his post. He watched the lane, the old slow circuit of his eyes, over the cars and the mothers in the corner where a dark motor car had once parked where cars did not park. I opened the gate at 10 to 9 and closed it at 9 sharp, the same as I had for 11 years, and every morning I said, "Morning, Sergeant." And every morning he said, "Morning, Mr. Alderbrook," and did not look at me when he said it, because he was watching the lane. We never spoke of it much, the two of us. Once, near the end of my time there, I asked him, because I had always wanted to and had never dared, whether he had known that first Tuesday what the man was going to do, whether he had seen it coming. "I saw a car that was parked wrong," he said. "That's all a man ever gets, not the thing itself. Just the wrongness at the edge of it before it has a shape." He was quiet a moment. "You can't stop what you wait to be sure of. By the time you're sure, it's happened. So you watch the edges and you move on the wrongness, and you accept that most mornings the car is just a car and you've stood ready for nothing at all." He glanced at me. "That's the job, Mr. Alderbrook. Standing ready for nothing, 10,000 mornings, so that on the 10,001st you're already where the trouble is going before it gets there. There's no glory in it. Most of it is nothing. But the nothing is the price of the something, and the something is a boy who walks into his own school and never knows how close it came." He looked back at the lane. "That's a good trade. I'd stand a lifetime of nothing for it." I retired the next spring. My knee finished me in the end, as I always knew it would, and a younger man has the broom now and the gate, and I hear there is still a plain guard at the green side gate 3 mornings a week still, watching, though it is not Cray anymore. He was moved on to other duties, other posts, other lines to hold. I do not know where he is now. I hope, wherever it is, that most of his mornings are nothing. But I think of him every autumn, when the plane trees drop their big yellow hands on the pavement. And I think of that one Tuesday when a man knelt in front of a small, frightened boy to make a picture out of his fear. And another man crossed 4 unhurried steps and put his own body in the way, and touched no one, and broke no law, and drew a line with nothing but his own stillness that the whole kingdom in the end agreed to keep. People ask me sometimes, the ones who know I was there, what the lesson of it is, what I learned standing at that gate. And I tell them what the sergeant taught me without ever once meaning to teach me anything. That the loudest thing in the world is often the man who is standing still. That a line is the only weapon you can be sure of, so you do not waste it and you do not cross it. And that the truest courage I ever saw was not a blow struck or a shout raised, but a plain man in a dark coat choosing, on 10,000 ordinary mornings, to stand ready for nothing. So that, on the one morning it mattered, a child could walk through a small green gate into the ordinary world, and go on believing, as every child has the right to believe, that the world is a safe place and no one is watching from the corner. He was watching from the corner, that was the whole of it, so the boy never had to.